Hi, welcome back. In this series, I want to talk about Moses and the constitution of the nation of Israel in the Ten Commandments and the laws that are given. Also, I want to go over the temple and remember, so these are central for Judaism. The nation of Israel, the people. The people are going to be prepared to go into the promised land. They're given a law. They're given a priesthood. Moses is a prophet. Later, they're going to be given judges as their rulers, and they're going to ask for a king. So prophet, priest, king are going to be types of what the Messiah will be like for Christianity. So I want to not only talk about Judaism, but also prepare the way for Christianity as we go over these big pieces in the Hebrew scriptures in the Old Testament. So the Ten Commandments are given twice in the scriptures. First, they're given in Exodus chapter 20, and they're given again in Deuteronomy chapter 5. And they're given twice because the first time they're given is when Moses is on Mount Sinai and he receives them from God and gives them to the people. Actually, God speaks them directly to the people. And then he inscribes them on a tablet, gives the tablet to Moses. And Moses comes down the mountain and finds the people committing idolatry. And he throws the tablet down, breaks it, as symbolic of their breaking the commands of God. And so God has him chisel out 2 more stone tablets and he inscribes on them again. That's the first generation who die off in the wilderness. The second generation, by the time you get to the book of Deuteronomy, this is the second giving of the law. Moses proclaims the law to the generation that has come of age. They were 20 years old or younger while they were wandering in the wilderness, so the law is given again to them. So what is the law, though? Let's go over this. There's a deeper meaning of the law, and the law is a summary of all that God requires. It's a summary. It could be some later in the wisdom literature. There will be things like meditate on the law day and night. So meditation on the law is for you to understand its significance, its deeper meaning, its application. So the first is that you should have no God before me. Okay, there's no other God. Remember, God is the eternal one, the self-existing one. There's no other eternal being besides God. God is supreme. And as supreme, he is the determiner of good and evil for humans. Remember, they tried to determine good and evil for themselves in the garden. God is the determiner of good and evil, and there's to be no other God. The second law is do not liken God to anything in the creation. So this has to do with making an idol. And it's not just something physical and outward, it's in your mind. Do not imagine God in finite ways. Don't think of the infinite in light of the finite. And they were doing that when they were worshiping the golden calf. The third law is don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. What is it to take something in vain? It's to take it lightly and thoughtlessly. So this is about integrity. You should have integrity. Don't be a hypocrite. It's about taking vows and keeping vows. Don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. And the Lord reveals himself in all the things he creates. So don't take anything for granted. It's taking the Lord's name in vain. The fourth one is remember the Sabbath day. Remember, they've already had the Sabbath day given to them since the creation. But they are to work for 6 days, and on the 7th day they are to rest. And remember, the Sabbath is where they remember their origin, their destiny, and their hope. And this is perpetual. The fifth commandment is honor your father and mother. This has to do with authority and insight. And your father and mother may not just be your physical father and mother, but your spiritual father and mother, the fathers of the faith. The sixth one, thou shalt not murder. Okay, it doesn't say kill, it says murder. So this has to do with the sanctity of life and considering the capacity to understand in the other, recognizing humanity in oneself and in another. The seventh command, thou shalt not commit adultery. So this is about marriage and the good and the goal. Remember the purpose of marriage, and ordinary adultery in a marriage is a result of spiritual adultery. If you haven't been faithful to God, it will come out in ways where you're not faithful to your spouse. Thou shalt not steal. This has to do with talent and ownership and what's yours and what is of value. You should produce that which is of value. You're a steward of what you have. You're not an owner, because we all die. We don't get to take our stuff with us. So there's applications here about ownership and capitalism and communism and who owns what. How about God owns everything and we're stewards of what we have for now. Thou shalt not bear false witness against your neighbor. So don't slander, don't speak falsely about others. So this has to do with truth. If you speak the truth, you know the truth, the whole truth, you will bring about justice. So truth and justice are connected. You can't have justice without truth. And the failure to speak the truth will result in injustice. And it talks about, it comes down to the third, from the first generation to the fourth generation, there's an accumulation of injustice that happens. And you can anticipate the intensification of the curse when that happens. And the last one is, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's stuff. So don't be discontent. Be content with what you have. So this has to do with our view of the good and contentment and coveting what others have. There can be joy and peace in suffering rather than discontentment. Right, so this is a summary of the law. And the law, again, remember, is written on the heart, is knowable from general revelation, but God is now giving it to them as part of the constitution of the nation of Israel. Let's see. I think I'm going to pause here and go to the whiteboard so that we can talk about the temple. All right, I'm going to just be right back. Okay, here we are at the whiteboard, and I'm going to ask you to draw and label the temple or the tabernacle. So this is a design that was given to Moses while he's on the mountain talking to God. And the temple is a picture of how they are to worship God. So everything inside the temple or the tabernacle is symbolic. And I'm saying temple or tabernacle because while they're in the wilderness, before they get to the promised land, actually before the time of David, from the time of God giving this to Moses and the King David, this is a temporary tent-like structure that while they're wandering in the wilderness, they're taking with them. They pack it up, they carry it. The priests are the ones in charge of all the furnishings and the structure, and taking it with them in a very holy way. Devoted, pure. The common person's not allowed to take part in this. So there's a priesthood, a tribe, the tribe of Levi. They are set aside because of their concern for the holiness of God. The incident with the calf at Sinai, where they were worshiping the idol. The Levites were the ones who went through the land and killed their brothers who were doing this immoral thing. And God set the Levites aside as his holy tribe. So the Levites are the ones who are going to be the priests and in charge of the tabernacle. Later, David is going to build the temple, which is a permanent structure. And we'll talk about the temple and the destruction of the temple later. For now, this is the furnishings inside the temple and the tabernacle. And it's symbolic and it's important, and I want you to draw it. Let's see, is it better for me to draw here or here? I think here. All right, so I'm going to draw, this is going to be called the outer courtyard. The outer courtyard is a kind of marking off, demarcating the sacred, which is inside, from the profane, which is outside. Everybody else could be outside, only priests and those who are sacrificing can come inside. So I left a little place for us to come in. So let's call this the outer courtyard. Okay, the outer courtyard. And it's demarcating sacred from secular. Unbelief, belief. Okay? Now, inside, there's a structure. We'll draw it like this. And here, there's going to be an altar for sacrificing animals, clean animals. I'm drawing it as if we're looking down on it, okay? Here is going to be where the priests wash their hands. This is called the laver. So let's label this now. This is the altar for sacrifice. This is the laver for cleansing. The priests will... So normal people, actually not even normal people, Israelites, will come here to offer sacrifices. Animals, not humans, animals. Clean and unclean. You could read about these animals in the book of Leviticus. And the priests are in here, and I'm going to make them wearing priestly garments. They have special clothes that they wear while they're ministering in the temple. So this is a doorway to get in. So the priests will accept the sacrifices from the people. Remember, the sacrifice through the death of another, sin is covered. And the priest will represent the people before God. So in here, there's going to be, here is the most holy place. So this is the Holy of Holies, or the most holy place. Let me just make that. And this is where the mercy seat is. And the mercy seat is where the 10 Commandments that Moses received from God is inside here. Also, Aaron's staff that buds later is in there, signifying that they are the ones to represent God to the people and the people to God. They are to lead in the priesthood. And manna, which is food God provided for them while they were in the wilderness for 40 years. Miraculous. So, this is the Holy of Holies, meaning the most holy place, and here is the mercy seat. Mercy seat. Okay, I'm hoping you're drawing this. This is where God is present. He is going to fill the temple, and his presence is here. Now, remember, God is infinite, so he's not only here, but he's specifically here with the people, where the priests are going to represent God to the people and the people to God. Now, once the priests enter, this is the holy place. This is the most holy place. Incidentally, only the high priest can enter the most holy place once a year on the Day of Atonement, where he brings the blood of the sacrifice and places it on the corners of the mercy seat, representing the whole people of God before God, asking for God's forgiveness for the nation. Otherwise, nobody goes here. But the priests go here. And when they first come in, there's a candelabra here. You've probably seen this symbol before. the candelabra is a candle, a light, right? But remember, it's not just a light. Light represents something. They are to be a light to the nations around them, particularly the law. The Israelites are to be a witness to those around them. So the light represents their witness. There's another altar here where they are to burn incense. The altar of incense. The altar of incense. And incense is, they're given a specific recipe and told, don't use this just for yourselves. This is for the sacred offering to God. And the incense is like their prayers going up before God. So this is representing worship. Okay, worship, witness. And before that is a table where they put bread. This is called the table of showbread. Table of showbread. And bread is representative of life. So we eat physical bread and we live physically, but the spiritual bread they were to feed upon is the Word of God. So this represents the Word of God. So I kind of went backwards, but if you notice, this is sacrifice, cleansing, word, worship, witness as a result. So there's a whole picture. Sacred, holy, non-holy. So there's a demarcation of the people of God from unbelievers. And then the people of God are to approach God in a particular way. First through the sacrifice, which represents justification, forgiveness. And then cleansing. Cleansing is through this process. You take in the Word of God, like you take in food, and you worship God in holiness, and you witness to what God's done and who God is, specifically through the law, to all of the nations. This was what the Israelites were to learn through this system of worship and sacrifice. So I want to tell you a little bit about what's involved. They have daily sacrifices, the morning sacrifice and the evening sacrifice here that the priests were to offer. There are sacrifices every time you sin. So there's a list of them. The burnt offering, which is where one offers their whole self up to God in devotion. There's the guilt offering. There's the sin offering. There's the fellowship offering. So these offerings were listed in the 5 books of Moses. Not really in Genesis, but after Genesis you can find them. And then there were other rituals. We talked about circumcision. This is the sign of the need for a new heart. Then there's the Passover. And the Passover is where they celebrate and remember the time they were brought out of Egypt. Then there's 3 festivals where all the people were to go to the tabernacle. Later it's going to be in Jerusalem. All the people were to go from wherever they lived, come together and celebrate these festivals. And the festivals are also very symbolic. So the first is Pentecost, or first fruits. And this is at the beginning of the harvest. It's 50 days after Passover. And this is what signifies the beginning of the ingathering of all the nations. So remember the promise to Abraham, through you all the nations are to be blessed. So when they celebrate first fruits, it's a sign of the ingathering of all the nations. God is going to gather all the nations together. Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement, is another high holy day. This is the day where the high priest enters the Holy of Holies that I was telling you about. And he is going to atone for the sins of the people. Now remember, the priest can't really atone. He can only represent them. So they need a high priest that can actually atone. And then there's the Feast of Harvest, or Ingathering. And this is at the end of the season of harvest, the ingathering, the end of harvest. It signifies the completion of the work of that year, but not just that year, the work of dominion being complete. And so this is the completion of the gathering of the nations. So we have at the beginning the first fruits, they're coming in, and at the end, all the nations are blessed. So this is the promise. And then there's the Sabbath. I think I mentioned this, but the Sabbath is to be remembered weekly. So let me give you a pattern. Daily sacrifices, morning and evening. Weekly, the Sabbath. There's a monthly new moon sacrifice. And then these 3 festivals. So they have a rhythm of worship where they're remembering who God is and what God's done, and witnessing to who God is. And remember, the Sabbath was as God worked and completed his work, so humans are to work and do the work of dominion, and one day that work will be completed. And when that work is completed, then there's rest, a Sabbath rest, an everlasting Sabbath rest. So these are some of the symbolic aspects of the ritual life of the Hebrews, Israelites. And this is going to be a picture that teaches them for hundreds of years until the first diaspora, which is the first time the Israelites are going to be taken out of the land and the temple is destroyed. They come back, and then the second diaspora is where the temple is destroyed completely, and it's still destroyed. So we need to talk about what happens after Moses and the second generation. That's where we're going to go next. All right, thanks.